Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll for everyone who's joining the call today. So thanks again for joining today's Empathy Hour session, which is our last Empathy Hour of the year. We're going to wait just a minute or two as people continue to trickle into the session. And in the meantime, I'm going to launch a poll on one thing that you're looking forward to this holiday season. Feel free to respond to the poll while we wait for people to join. And once you've responded, we'd love if everyone could introduce themselves in the chat box, share what country, what city they're calling in from, and just a little bit about themselves. And I'm seeing that having a break from work/teaching seems to be a popular response. I can certainly relate with that one. Spending time with family or friends, virtually or in person. Eating and cooking a lot of delicious food, which I too will be partaking in. Well, yeah, so it seems like eating a lot of food, having a break from work and teaching, and spending time with friends and family seem to be the most popular responses among the audience members. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. And I see that folks are starting to introduce themselves in the chat box as well. Thank you all for sharing out your responses. So before we get started, a quick disclaimer that for security purposes on Zoom, we've muted everyone on the call, so you can still share your thoughts and experiences by writing into the chat box. And Shreya, who's on our team, will read some of them out. We'll also be recording the content portions of the session so that we can share it with peers who are unable to attend. That means that anything that you share with us tonight will not be shared out on the recording. So any personal anecdotes that you share will be edited out beforehand, and we'll be sure to cut those pieces. So feel free to share as much or as little as you're comfortable sharing during the session. So that said, let's go ahead and get started with today's Empathy Hour. We have 3 exciting panelists from 3 incredible organizations who are joining us today from 6 Seconds, Greater Good Science Center, and Empatico. So we'll be discussing compassionate conversations and embracing empathy during the holidays. So why are we all here today? As we all know, the holidays are fast approaching, which often means joyous times. So we're excited to see family, but that also means convening with people who might hold different viewpoints from our own, and sharing space with people who might disagree with our beliefs or with our viewpoints. The last year has been especially challenging, which kind of lays the foundation for a diverse range of conversation topics, which can be truly difficult topics to talk about, but they can also be really enriching conversations at the same time. So as you can see from our graphic here, for those of you who are familiar with the Game of Thrones, it shows Khaleesi and Jon Snow, who were tasked with cooperating with one another and working to achieve their respective goals despite their disagreements. So just like Khaleesi and Jon Snow, how can we make the best of the holidays to ensure that we're all prepared to have potentially difficult conversations in ways that are constructive, driven by empathy, and conducive to a more cooperative and understanding future? So with that in mind, I'm incredibly excited to introduce our 3 panelists for today's conversation. We've got Maryam Abdullah from the Greater Good Science Center. If you'd like to share a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Hi everyone, I'm Maryam. I'm based out of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. Our center provides or translates science into content for people who aren't scientists and ways to use this science to cultivate a meaningful life. And I'm the parenting program director, so my area of expertise is, or my area of passion is really supporting families. I'm trained as a developmental psychologist, and I'm super jazzed to be joining you on this Empathy Hour.
We're super excited to have you here, and yeah, thanks again for joining us. And then we've got Cherilyn Leet from 6 Seconds.
Hi everyone, it's so great to see people from around the world here tonight. I'm Cherilyn Leet. I work at 6 Seconds. If you don't know our organization, we're a global nonprofit, one of the first with largest reach for practitioners and explorers of emotional intelligence. And our goal is to have 1 billion people and children practicing emotional intelligence skills by 2039. So now you're part of this group of outreach. We have free resources, everything from humanitarian pop-up festivals with the United Nations, World Children's Day, and also, corporate training, nonprofit, organizational assessments as well, and the whole gamut of SEL curriculum. So thank you for having me. Delighted to see everyone today.
Thanks so much for being here, Cherilyn. And then finally, from our very own Empatico, we've got Verónica Vázquez Ugalde, who will share a little bit about herself and her background.
Thank you, Noah. And just first of all, I'm just really honored to be here with Maryam and Cherilyn. Just really excited. I'm really a big admirer of both of your work. But yes, I am Veronica. I work at Empatico as a program associate. And previously I worked in the nonprofit evaluation space, but now at Empatico, I'm really passionate about leveraging education psychology research into useful resources for educators, adults, and students so that we can have a meaningful impact in children and adults as well. Most recently, I've been focusing on creating education opportunities and professional development for educators as well as caregivers. So you might have seen our professional development courses online, which are free if you want to access them. And you'll see some more in the 2021 programs that we're offering. So really excited to be here. And thank you, Noah, for the intro.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for being here. I should introduce myself as well. My name is Noah Garcia Hassel, for those of you who don't know me. I have been with the Empatico team for about 3 years now. I was previously a classroom teacher of 7 years, 4 years as a EFL teacher in Madrid, and then 3 years as a middle school science teacher at a transitional bilingual school here in New York City. So I recently joined the programs team pivoted from the marketing team to the programs team alongside Veronica and a few other team members just a few months ago. So yeah, I will be moderating tonight's conversation, and I'm very excited to be here alongside all of you. And so thanks so much to everyone for being a part of this. The questions we have prepared for our discussion will underpin 4 main learning objectives, all of which are related to our session topic on having conversations with loved ones using empathy, kindness, and SEL during the holidays. So each question will relate to having difficult conversations in ways that embody empathy, exercising self-care and mindfulness when engaging in these conversations, reinforcing core Empatico skills and other practices that exercise emotional intelligence, and applying each of these strategies to digital settings. So we're going to get started with a quick Mentimeter word cloud to all of you in the audience. We would love to know, what are 3 emotions that you feel or that you associate with family get-togethers during the holidays? I'm going to share a link into the chat box right now, so please feel free to click the link, input the voting code, and share your 3 emotions. Yeah, so a lot of emotions there. See, joy and love, excitement, pressured, overwhelmed, stress, connection, unity, fuzzy, comforting, annoyed. Although I am loving that joy and love are the most prominent words and emotions on this word cloud.
I was just going to say the same. But definitely relate to a lot of the emotions that have been shared here as well.
Me too.
And important to mention, someone wrote sad for many people, you know, depending on if they're missing loved ones or separate from them, it could be also profoundly a time of grief or mourning or sadness, isolation.
Absolutely, especially right now with the limitations on traveling. Excellent. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all of these mixed bag of emotions. Yeah, so as we can all see, the holidays can evoke a very wide range of feelings, joy, anxiety, stress, feeling overwhelmed. So question to the panelists, what does that say about the feelings that the holidays and time with family can surface?
Yeah, I think this word cloud kind of depicts it really well. I feel like, you know, while there might be some underlying feelings of love, no matter what, there might always be conflicting emotions. And I think part of heading into those is being able to manage those better and kind of moving forward with optimism and positivity so that we can make the most of the time we have together, especially after a year like we've had where we might appreciate quality time even more than before.
I'm going to pop back over to the deck quickly. And so, yeah, as we think about sharing spaces with loved ones, particularly those who hold, different viewpoints from our own, it's totally normal to feel some or all of these mixed emotions at the same time, especially as we prepare for particularly difficult conversations with family members. So that said, our first question to the panelists: what tools and techniques would you recommend others keep in mind as they prepare to have conversations with loved ones across a wide variety of topics during the holidays? And Veronica, I'd love to kick it off over to you to answer this, to be the first to respond to this question.
Sure, yeah. I think, well, I'd like to start by saying I think preparing is key, and just the fact of starting to think about preparing is a big step and a big strategy to think about. For myself, my family, I love spending time with my family, but I know that we disagree on certain topics or the way we communicate sometimes. So one thing I've tried to do more recently is try to talk with my partner who comes home for the holidays with me on particular scenarios or conversations that might come up, and start visualizing how I might respond to those comments, conversations, or topics. And also thinking about things I might not feel prepared to talk about. So kind of thinking of what boundaries I want to set with my loved ones and how I can communicate those respectfully and lovingly in a way that helps them understand where I'm coming from. Another thing that I like to do is kind of related to gratitude, but one thing that I found that helps me is thinking about moments where I've learned from those people I'll be having conversations with and my family and friends, and think about things I've learned from them in the past, because I think when tense conversations come up, sometimes I found myself like closing up or becoming really defensive or like kind of dismissing what they're saying. And I think when I'm more intentional about acknowledging things I've learned from them, I'm more capable of having an open mind and engaging in those discussions. So I try to do that before. And then the last thing I would say really helps me is thinking about values that I want to embody, and really concretely thinking about how those values come into action. So for example, if I really want to be an open-minded person and that's a value that's important to me, I think about how can I ask questions to learn about what the other person is saying, or if I want to be a critical thinker, how could I make sure that I am not falling into assumptions I've made or catch myself making assumptions in the moment. So those little things really have helped me in the past, and I'm trying to be even more intentional about them this year.
I love those suggestions, Veronica, and I think similar to your last point about being intentional, I think one of the really helpful ways to go into gatherings where I may be feeling a little bit nervous or a little bit conflicted about already in advance of me even being there is to acknowledge positive intentions. So for myself, in a similar way as you suggested, Veronica, kind of preparing myself by setting my own intention and thinking about what am I coming into this gathering with a focus on. Am I focused on finding joy and humor in this really difficult time? And we've talked a little bit about families just being under a lot of stress and strain right now. And I think the American Psychological Association has done a survey of stress in America, and they found that at the beginning of this pandemic in May, over half of parents have experienced high amounts of stress. So I think the other piece of acknowledging intentions is to assume positive intentions in the other people that you're going to meet, sort of giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're coming in with goodwill as much as possible at this time, particularly after just having their lives potentially upended with having their kids being home, having remote homeschooling, and that's the best possible scenario, where others, of course, as Cherilyn, you had shared, people are grieving and they may not be coming with all the resources that they potentially had in years prior. So sort of assuming that people are coming in with positive intentions too, rather than potentially kind of coming in feeling defensive or prepared for slights, or being prepared to just sort of automatically see somebody coming in with hostility. Maybe encouraging yourself to reframe that and assuming that maybe what you're going to see is someone who's just trying their very best right now too, and also just wanting to make this gathering as positive for you and for themselves as possible.
Beautiful, Maryam and Veronica. So many helpful strategies in there. I can share a personal technique and tool that I've used with my in-laws, because, you know, different cultures, different expectation of what the holidays are, seem very different in terms of family time, food, how much time in the house versus outside the house. So with us, it's been really helpful to have pre-conversations, mini pre-conversations. Phone calls 3 weeks in advance, 2 weeks in advance, just kind of mini setting this stage, talking about expectations on time, asking them, like, what is your number one priority that we do or cook? How can I help with that? And it's like starting to have those conversations rather than when you show up at the door, because that can feel really flooding and overwhelming. Like, here's a list of 30 items and we have to do it all within 24 hours. So just kind of saying, doing that in as much advance as possible and realistic for your family. I've been with my husband, it'll be 9 years in January. I would say it took us the first 6 years to figure that part out. So hopefully that will help someone else.
Yeah, I love the idea of kind of like pre-buffering those encounters with people with sort of like small bite-sized conversations beforehand to kind of work into those like larger, more involved conversations. I think with that in mind, we'd like to quickly turn it over to the audience. We'd love to hear from you all as well. For everyone in attendance, what values do you keep front and center when preparing to engage in difficult conversations? Particularly those, loved ones who might hold different viewpoints from your own. And how do you stand true to those values?
I think maybe one other one that I would add is patience. I think just being patient with one another and understanding that there might be misunderstanding along the way, and that's okay. We're all trying to get it right.
Absolutely, yeah, and it can be, certainly. I know I have experienced this, and patience is something that many times I have had to exercise on my own, and I think many of us had, is kind of assuming that people do have the best intentions, and also challenging yourself to really express that patience when you might disagree with a different perspective. We're going to go ahead and move on to our second question for the day. So when you think about that moment, to the panelists, when you're actually engrossed in those conversations, what are some critical socio-emotional learning skills that adults can exercise during, these especially kind of like fueled conversations? And Cherilyn, we'd love if you could kick us off with this question.
Sure, so many ideas here. So I'll just start with a couple key ones. Maybe some acronyms or visuals to help you. One would be this idea of a triangle with thoughts, feelings, and actions, and thinking about empathy in terms of all three of those components. So, how are you going to be thinking empathic thoughts of this individual? What are you going to be observing of their behaviors? And then the feeling part, which would be how can you feel with them if they're sharing or expressing pain or urgency or discomfort or something, or love and joy, how can you mirror that back and just be present with it and not scared of that feeling? And then finally, this action behavior of empathy, where if they're saying they really do need you to support them in this way, even if you're not comfortable going all the way, maybe you could take one step in that direction as a sign of love and a bridge building. So it's all about the mindset that you have before and then during, and keep referring back to the ultimate idea. And my husband and I use the term same team. Whenever things start to derail, same team. All right, okay, let's regroup here. And it's really helpful during family discussions as well, to remember the ultimate goal is that you have unconditional love for one another. And so as part of that, let's, keep that in mind. So that's my.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to piggyback on what Cherilyn was saying in terms of same team. And one of the practices that I think is really helpful to do is really think about what identities do you share with the other people that you may not be seeing eye to eye with in that particular moment. And, this could be anything like, you both love the football. I mean, maybe somebody loves the 49ers, but you love the Raiders, but you still love the NFL and you're going to watch the game on Sunday night. Or, perhaps you both have a love of cooking and mac and cheese is your favorite meal ever. And so that's something that you share. So I think being able to just remind yourself, okay, these are the pieces that we have in common. And although we do disagree or we don't see eye to eye on some things, here is what we do share. And as a family, potentially, I think you could even think about you share the same grandparents or great grandparents. So kind of remembering that there is something that you have in common that you can draw upon to sort of maintain this connection. And I think the other piece that is helpful too to think about is when you are sort of seeing someone within your family expressing something that you don't agree with or you just see very differently, kind of lean into that curiosity and kind of lean into thinking about, well, where is this coming from for them? Perhaps there are particular values that they have that you can't assume you know about. And so I think potentially being inquisitive and asking questions, or sort of asking, well, why is that very important to you, or why do you see this in that particular light? And I think being able to approach as rather than avoid talking about it, that also maintains a sense of connection and a link that you can continue to build upon by using curiosity and humility, like as someone was sharing before, seeking to understand and not seeking to persuade. You're kind of coming in just wanting to know a little bit more about this, for what experiences formed those particular values, and sort of what's the story behind why your family member has that perspective, and that may or may not be what your perspective is.
I think those are all really helpful strategies. I'm taking notes myself here as well. But I think one thing I would like to add, and this is something I have not mastered, but just keep working on, is when somebody else is speaking, I find myself always trying to come up with my response as they're speaking so that I can respond immediately. And one thing I've been trying to work on, that the times that I have successfully done it, I feel like it works, is rather than thinking of my response as the other person is speaking, just really fully giving my attention to that person and what they're saying. And then it's okay if there's a little bit of silence afterwards if I want to kind of gather my thoughts and then ask a question. But it just helps me not be so focused on my own reactions to what they're saying and focus more on really truly understanding what they're trying to communicate.
Amazing.
I love that too, Veronica. I was just going to say that's thanks for sharing your vulnerability too, that this is something that you're working on. I think I also want to express my vulnerability too, in terms of these practices. These are strategies that I reach to, but I'm certainly, I don't have full command of this whole library of strategies. So I sort of view it as a work in progress. I'm a work in progress as well.
Oh, absolutely. Just because we research the stuff doesn't mean it's just a natural on-off switch for application. Let's get real here, that, in changing a relationship or a dynamic, between a family system or a dyad, there's a lot of failure or oopsies in the transition process. So you have to kind of reset your expectations too. Like, even if you just are able to pause and restate one out of the 3 statements, and then you're like, well, that didn't go as planned, but I made it one step closer, and so maybe tomorrow I'll be able to reframe 2 statements that this individual is saying, so you can always set smaller goals for success there. And then one acronym I wanted to share with you is VET, Validate, Explore, Transform. And that's the acronym we use at 6 Seconds, talking about emotional navigation for yourselves and others, and this partnership and helping to co-regulate. And so, just like Veronica's saying, if you're really truly an empathic listener, you're leaning in, you're using your body language, you're mirroring them, you're not having the conversation with one person standing and one person sitting, because that right away, the power dynamics are there. And then just being aware of the demand withdrawal patterns in relationships, and start to observe when they occur. So this can happen, this happens with me and my sister. We're 8 years apart, and the oldest sibling, youngest sibling dynamic is real. And so we even had to catch ourselves at Thanksgiving and say, you know what, we need to outgrow this pattern. We laughed about it. We're like, there we go again. So kind of just laughing at yourselves and saying, oh, there it is, demand withdraw. And she's like, oh, I don't want to withdraw anymore. I'm like, I don't want to be the demanding older sister. And we laugh, we move on, and try to do something moving forward with that. Yeah.
I love that. I definitely catch that with my younger brother as well.
I do too with my older sister. Yeah, and I think there is so much value in that level of self-awareness as well, and understanding those dynamics is, kind of an essential first step to then being able to address them and really like work on reinforcing those family dynamics as well. So yeah, thank you all for sharing all of those recommendations. All of that resonates so much. I mean, especially even, Veronica, the listening to not to respond, but to actually, come back in a way that's meaningful and well thought out. And then Maryam, as you said, like leaning into that curiosity in a way that really like deconstructs where they're coming from, and understands, where that perspective originates. So with that in mind, we'd love to turn it back over to the audience. We're going to do a quick second poll, and we'd love to know, so what is one key socio-emotional or conversational skill that you all in the audience would like to reinforce or work on in your own time? I know a couple of folks have been sharing out in the chat box already, but I'm going to quickly launch the poll. Feel free to respond to it and also kind of share the reasoning behind your response in the chat box. I see respectful communication and self-regulation seem to be the top picks. And I have to share that, for me personally, I think self-regulation would be a big one as well, because especially when you are going into those conversations that have kind of a foundation or a history or a pre-context. I know for me personally, especially with, for example, with my sister, and I can sometimes go into those conversations sort of ready to go on the defensive. And it is an exercise in self-regulation to kind of like put those barriers down and really kind of challenge myself to open myself up a little bit more, really not go on a defensive and think about, where is your perspective coming from, and lean into that curiosity.
I really like the self-awareness one. I feel like, sometimes self-awareness is really hard because you don't always like everything you realize about yourself, but I think what you get out of it is a lot, and it could translate into very meaningful and even more fruitful relationships. So I think I would pick that one if I were to pick from this group as well. Just getting a better understanding of what things are triggering me or how I respond to certain things, and how I can break out of those habits.
Another thought that occurred to me, Noah, is that some families are not going to be able to actually be together in person. And so sort of if respectful communication is a priority for me, how can I be thinking about doing that perhaps on FaceTime or on a Zoom call? And as Veronica, you shared sort of this act of listening, really listening. How am I showing that when I'm removed from them, when I can't hug them, I can't hold them, or sort of give them other kinds of cues that helps them know that I value what it is that they're sharing with me, and that they're spending this time, this moment, that we're spending these moments together. So I think that that's one of the pieces that, again, to kind of think about well in advance, as well as during. So, you know, are there lots of other kind of media distractions around you when you're on Zoom, or are you showing that you're giving your family members undivided attention during that key time that you're together?
That's so important. Totally right. And it's interesting to think about the importance of body language in just communicating non-verbally, and the role it plays when we're in person versus when we're on Zoom, and how we might compensate for that in those conversations that happen virtually.
And I'd like to reiterate what Miriam said about the curiosity. So if that's one of your values or a mindset you're going to wear going into this, it's part of your self-knowledge and self-regulation strategy. One thing I've used in a particularly uncomfortable, I guess, few days or week I had with relatives was I started just documenting in a notebook, like a scientist, you know, key moments in the relationship, as though I were the observer of that week. Like, let me look at these interactions. Let me study them. Let me say what was said and write it down. And then, like, reviewing that a month or two later, actually, I was able to identify patterns that then made me better prepared. And I could do the self-work going in so that the next round was even more positive. So that curiosity, like Miriam said, is so key.
Totally.
That resonates so much with the comment from before. I forgot who shared it, but about visualizing the conversations and kind of like mapping out what those interactions are like beforehand to really understand what the best approach is. I think we're going to go ahead and go on to the third question for our panelists. So thanks again to everyone in the audience for sharing your responses on that poll. So we all know that a ton has happened in 2020. We all have different experiences, and personal reactions, you know, can vary greatly from person to person depending on who you are. So why is it so important to take time to reflect and take time for self-care after having these conversations? And Miriam, I'd love to turn it over to you to kick us off with this.
Yeah, you know, this is such a great question, Noah. As I sort of mentioned before, we're in a global pandemic, and this hasn't happened in 100 years, over 100 years, and being able to acknowledge and honor all of those complex feelings that were shared in the word cloud, as well as sort of that swirl inside of us, I think is important. And, you know, there's sort of the famous line about what you resist persists, and being able to give yourself permission to feel, using Mark Brackett's term, Mark Brackett's language from Ruler. I think being able to do that, and Cherilyn, you spoke a little bit about a strategy that you used in terms of writing down, like leaning into your curiosity and writing down sort of as you would as a scientist. And I think there's something really valuable about expressive writing. So sort of, if you've had this family gathering, and after the gathering has happened, your need to process all of those feelings may be constrained because you don't have that chance to really maybe process it with your family any longer, or maybe only in limited opportunities. So taking the time to actually write down what you felt, and being able to give yourself this opportunity to form a narrative or coherent narrative of what happened. I think it also gives you permission to document that this was real and these were my authentic feelings in that moment in time. And actually potentially being able to it as you need to. Some people have a habit of writing in a journal, or some people like to sort of leave themselves voice memos. And this could also be art or sketching. I mean, I doodle all the time, probably in meetings that I shouldn't be doodling, but it's just sort of my way of also kind of processing what's happening. And I think written expression or expressive writing helps with that. Now, the other piece to this is we also kind of need to acknowledge that we may make missteps in relationships too. And sometimes when we realize that, it's important to think about, well, how am I going to make amends and potentially offer an authentic apology for my own decisions that perhaps I didn't intend to harm someone, but the impact was that someone was harmed by choices that I made. So I think being able to kind of go into a situation where you realized or recognized that something that you did was insensitive, being able to acknowledge that to the person that the harm was done to. So if I'm with my sisters, for example, and my sisters are 9 and 11 years older than me too, sometimes during this time, as we said before, our resources are low. So, all of our self-regulatory capacities are diminished, and we're running on empty a lot of times too. So if I've said something insensitive, then I'm going to sort of step into an opportunity to make amends and repair it, and call it out for myself and say that this is what I did. And there's no excuse for it, and that I'm truly sorry. And, maybe, hey, can we FaceTime next weekend and actually just talk about that series that we've been trying to watch together, and try to kind of cultivate that connection again, so that our ties stay strong as much as we want them to, and as much as we can make them.
Yeah, Maryam, what you said about our tanks running on low really resonates. I think we're all both prone to being more triggered or more sensitive, and also making mistakes because of that. So your advice really resonates with me. And just in general, I feel like when we practice empathy, and we're really trying to be self-aware, all that takes a lot of brain power and emotional power. So I think, and I've seen this in the chat a lot, there's a self-care piece to this that involves, if you need to take time alone, that's fine. If you need to talk it out with somebody who wasn't there, that works. I feel like it's really important to find a strategy that works for you to recharge and re-energize in order to be able to amend or continue building those relationships in whatever way best fits whatever happened during those conversations. And then the other thing I wanted to add, I think you guys might be picking up on this, but I really love gratitude. I think it really reframes my thinking, and I think it has really helped me, especially this year. But I think at the end of those conversations, or, if you're staying longer with loved ones, whatever it is, just expressing gratitude to them for either sharing whatever it was that they shared, for being open with you, for stepping into a situation both with vulnerability and them also maybe acknowledging and validating your feelings, and maybe sharing like a quick note or something, a text message, I think really goes a long way. And I think it also helps end those interactions in a positive note and come into the future interactions, kind of carrying that high from those moments.
Amazing. I was thinking of like what you were talking about, articulating the gratitude for that individual and being sincere and authentic with it, because they can tell if it's, a forced compliment, right? But you really do appreciate their insight with this new data, or that they sat there with you and truly listened for as long as they did, or whatever it is. And if this is a meaningful relationship to you and you feel like it's safe to continue deepening this relationship, then we would ask you to consider, a 5-to-1 ratio. If you need 5 positive interactions to 1 more heated interaction to maintain your relationship where it is, that's just the baseline. If you're healing a relationship, it needs to actually start moving to a 10-to-1 ratio. So in that case, you'd have to think, well, what can I do to create a kind of neutral bridge? Is it going to be, we're going to talk about dogs, on Zoom in 2 weeks from now, and we're just going to have a whole conversation sharing dog photos or memes or something, something that's low risk, that can start filling your bank account of respect and love. So that way, next time, you can't if you're only having these types of heated conversations, then you do need to re-examine, the relationship, and just, is this what both of you want? And if you're going to put in the time, you need those positive interactions and low stakes, high humor, for sure. You have to schedule it. You have to plan for it. It's not natural, especially given the stress of today.
It's so true.
I think that's so key, Cherilyn. Being able to plan for positive interactions, I think that's also very healing too, to be able to know that you can look forward to something together. I think being able to do that actually is a form of self-care that I know I count on too, is sort of looking to moments in the future where I'll be able to have I like to watch different TV shows on Netflix with different friends, and being able to just talk to them about, hey, did you see that episode? And looking forward to being able to connect over something that may not necessarily be the most important thing in the world, but it's just a lightness that I think I need in my life right now. The other thing I was thinking about too is I actually wanted to offer another strategy that sometimes is really difficult, and that has to do with considering the choice of forgiveness. And when we have been hurt, I think the way that I define forgiveness from the research that I read is not equating it with forgetting or pretending like something didn't happen, or not seeking to find ways to make things right. But forgiveness instead is a choice of go of anger and exploring the possibility of trying to approach or just kind of wish kindness on another person that may have hurt you. And those two parts are both very difficult, and maybe it's just the first part that I can consider more immediately is choosing to let go of the anger, because I know that it can be destructive for me or cause me too many sleepless nights to hang on to any longer. And I think one of the ways that I can take care of myself is considering whether I can choose to let go of that anger while still acknowledging that, yes, harm was done or I was hurt. But perhaps one way of trying to heal from that hurt is trying to choose that I will no longer hold that rage or hold on to that anger. And I'm not saying that this is sort of I think that's useful scenarios, but it's something to consider as a care too.
Yeah, that resonates so much. I mean, I know I personally have struggled many times with just that, and it is, such a critical part to the healing process is, kind of letting go of some of that anger and allowing yourself the room and the space to, just forgive.
Especially now, maybe you'll find you're the only one in your whole family that attends webinars about empathy. Right? You have language, you have verbiage, you have strategies, you have acronyms, and bringing those things to a situation where that's not a conversation piece for those individuals. You go through like a grief process just with that, where you didn't know, now you do know, you want to do better. And then you have this kind of anger situation where you said, well, they should know better too. And I'm using my strategy, so they should be along on the same journey. And for heaven's sakes, you know? And then there's the beyond, which is what Miriam's talking about. It's like kind of this final like acceptance, surrender part where you recognize that's great that you went on your own journey and you have these tools, and be grateful for that. And you cannot force people along their journeys either. You really need to make space for both your own journey and their journey. And we don't know how long or what shape these will take, and you kind of just let it be there.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, I think on that note, we'd love to actually open it up to the audience in case the audience has any questions that they would like to present directly to the panelists. We have a couple of questions that were submitted through the registration as well, but we'll hold off and see if anyone has any immediate questions they'd like to share into the chat box.
I do see that what Maryam and Cherilyn Leet shared is resonating a lot.
I would love to ask Miriam one of the questions from Tabitha, saying you exude a very peaceful spirit. Have you always been that way?
That's very kind. Thank you for that. You know, I think I think I do try to approach situations as with compassion and grace for myself too, because it's I feel as though, you know, we're all struggling in some way, and I think that sort of I try to hold on to that. I truly try to hold on to the fact that somehow, some way, we sort of all share this common experience of struggle and suffering, and you know, sometimes I'm surprised. I have a kindergartner who is who's at home doing remote school, so I'm surprised he hasn't come in here. But there are moments where I get frazzled too, and I have to kind of hold on to just using as many of these strategies as I possibly can. It helps to work at greater good because I've got access to a lot of this content all the time, and I feel so grateful that that I'm close to using a lot of these practices that Veronica, you talked about, Cherilyn, that you talked about too. And I think for us, it's also just, for me, it's really important to just let you know that in truth, I have really hard moments too, and these are the strategies that I try to pull out of my pocket when I know I need them as well.
Yeah, and actually on that note, it looks like there's a question from Victoria, an extension to Miriam and Cherilyn's point. What does the process look like to reach the place of understanding instead of anger when family members do not use the strategies that we do? That's a great question.
It is a great question. You know, I think one of the things, Victoria, that I think about is that sometimes, although I may be exploring the decision or the choice of forgiveness, I also reserve and acknowledge that I also need to protect myself. And maybe in some situations, that means that I think someone mentioned this in the chat earlier as well, where you honor your own needs, and if that means setting limits and boundaries as well, where you are limiting your interactions because you know what you need, and a potential interaction with a person whom that hurt still is very raw, it may not be the time to immediately approach and keep approaching it. There may be a need to sort of give some space, and that's okay too. And I think the process of forgiveness is long. It can be years, depending on what's happened, and or a lifetime too. So I think honoring what your own needs are, I think is really important, and in that journey.
Yes, and Victoria had mentioned humility was one of her values. And so with that arc and narrative, I would say even when you've reached that point where you're accepting, part of that is because you realize in many ways you're back at square one as well. You're a beginner in something else, emotionally or socially. We're always learning. So if you once you see that and you really can really live that and be humbled by it, through meeting people like Maryam, Noah, Veronica, right? I'm humbled by your presence. And so I see, wow, I have a long way to go. I'm back on the journey as well. So that's kind of helped my patience. And people think patience could be just something you're born with. It's a thread that you can grow. And I've seen teachers grow from, having a very hot, igniting, patience thread to, wow, you can't imagine things that they won't react to now through practice and sustained. So if you can learn it, then, we're all on the journey.
Absolutely. And I think with that, to that point as well about learning those practices and sort of piggybacking off of, Lenny's comment in the chat, reminding us that others are not necessarily specifically or explicitly taught about emotional strategies. I think there's something also to be said about modeling those strategies for other adults who don't necessarily have those tools. And with that, I know we are quickly approaching our 6 o'clock hard stop. So I do want to be mindful of everyone's time on the call. We can continue the conversation if you would like by using the Empathy Hour hashtag on social media. We'd love to, hear your stories, how you're preparing to show empathy and compassion to loved ones during the holidays as well. Feel free to give us all a follow on social media, Empatico, 6 Seconds, Greater Good Science Center. Once again, we'll be sharing out this presentation deck for anyone who registered for the session, so you should get this information within the next couple of days. And if you'd like to keep in touch with any of the panelists, Maryam, Cherilyn, or Veronica, you have all of their contact information here as well. And then finally, here's a list of resources for the session from Greater Good Science Center, 6 Seconds, Teaching Tolerance, and Empatico, including a holiday guide that we've created that includes a more robust overview of everything that we've discussed during the session today. So once again, we'll send out the presentation deck and the recording to anyone who registered. So be on the lookout for an email in the coming days. And big thank you to Maryam, Cherilyn, and Veronica for being our panelists tonight. Huge thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today as well. We hope these tips are useful going into the holidays. And with that, we wish you all a wonderful and joyous holiday and a happy new year.
Thank you, Noah, for moderating as well, and to everybody for sharing their anecdotes and being open in this conversation with us as well.
Yeah, I also wanted to extend my gratitude for being a part of an affirming community. So thank you. You renew my hope. Thank you so much.
Stay safe, everyone. Stay in touch.